Welcome back to The Point, a part of the Vendetta Sports Media Podcast Network. My name is Jarrod Prosser, and I'm very happy to have you with us again today. On each episode of The Point, I'll examine a topic, a question, or an issue currently impacting the NBA. Today, with the trade deadline approaching in what is, thanks to the play-in tournament and flattened lottery odds, an NBA marketplace that is increasingly populated with buyers, we're going to take a look at the sellers, the teams that will be actively hawking their players around the league right up to that February 9th trade deadline. Before we get into our list, let's start by ruling out a couple of teams. The Indiana Pacers and the Washington Wizards, in this case. The Pacers' surprisingly competitive season, plus the obvious joy that it must be to play alongside Tyrese Halliburton, has led to big man Miles Turner U-turning from actively campaigning for a trade to the Lakers only a few months ago to re-signing with the Pacers for a further 2 years at $60 million. With Turner being such an obviously good fit with so many contenders, his apparent removal from the trade landscape also makes it unlikely that Pacers general manager Kevin Pritchard will look to move sharpshooting Buddy Hield. Washington's recent trade of Rui Hachimura has spelled out their intention to re-sign forward Kyle Kuzma and roll with a big three, and we're using that term very loosely here, of Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, and Kuzma. Is that the right move in the long run? Probably not, but that's for another edition of The Point on another day. Instead, we'll start with the Orlando Magic. Last week, I guested on That's Some Cheese with Vendetta's Grand Poobah Trey Dalbert. On that pod, I said that the Magic's front line will be the best in the NBA within 5 seasons. That could be a conservative estimate. Their backcourt, though, not so much. Orlando has some potentially good players holding down those spots at the moment. Cole Anthony is a clutch shot maker. Markelle Fultz a wonderful athlete and crafty as hell. Jalen Suggs will be a very, very good defender one day. Can you, though, imagine any of them starting at guard for a genuinely championship contending team? No, me neither. They could turn out to be very good players. Cole, though, could top out as the new Terry Rozier. Fultz a defensively deficient Rajon Rondo. And Suggs the new Chris Dunn. That's not exactly inspiring to think about. With their front court coming together so much faster than even the most optimistic fan could have hoped for, could Orlando look to bolster their backcourt through a consolidation trade? In addition to those 3 guards that should still have enough sheen on them to garner something of value in the trade market, Orlando also has veterans Gary Harris and Terrence Ross, as well as the youngster RJ Hampton, who they could dangle. Mo Bamba finally showed some development last season, but he's perhaps 6th on the Magic's big man depth chart. He must be aching to get moved. And given the Magic are unlikely to want to pay him, he's almost a lock to get traded. In addition to the players, the Magic also hold all of their own first and second round picks, plus a couple of extra first rounders from Chicago this year and Denver in 2025, plus an additional 8 second rounders. They have the assets to attach to players to make something happen should they wish. So keep an eye on the Magic. Let's cast our eye to San Antonio, where for the first time since David Robinson was fulfilling his naval service, the Spurs are genuinely tanking. As much as they're prioritising the development of their youngsters, they do have some enticing veterans that they could offer up. If you're after some shooting, could I interest you in a Doug McDermott? A two-way wing's what you're after. Is Josh Richardson to your liking? The name I'd like to focus on here, however, is Jakob Poeltl. Next to high-end big wings, a genuine centre that won't get played off the floor in the cauldron of the playoffs is the hardest gem to mine in basketball. Unless you're a genuinely elite offensive talent, Karl Anthony Towns, for instance, then you simply can't get away with being a defensively exploitable big man in the playoffs. A modern centre needs to be able to bang with Joel Embiid, to deal with the inventiveness of Nikola Jokic, to repel the forceful drives of Giannis Antetokounmpo, hang with stretch bigs like Giannis's teammate Brook Lopez. On top of that, they need to provide passable defense when switched onto jitterbug guards. It's a hell of an ask. Giannis and Bam Adebayo aside, there really isn't a player that can handle all of these assignments well. This is where Poeltl is a fascinating proposition, though. The Austrian is undoubtedly a better defender when in drop coverage. He averages 2 blocks, a steal, 11 boards per 36 minutes on his career. Good numbers. Those numbers are down a little bit this season, though I think that can be attributed to the fact that he's playing with the worst set of defensive teammates in the entire NBA. In short, he remains a sneakily elite interior defender and quite good on the perimeter as well. There is a whole collection of NBA centers who defend the paint well and, like Pirtle, struggle offensively. Stephen Adams, Clint Capella, Ivica Zubac, Mitchell Robinson, to name but a few. What separates Pirtle from that bunch is that he can hang on the perimeter defensively. He's not exactly fleet of foot, but his reflexes are fantastic and he's far more agile than he's given credit for. His employment of angles is elite and he's almost always in the perfect position. Whilst Pirtle can't really score, his shooting range doesn't extend far beyond the tips of his fingers. He is an underrated playmaker. He's dishing out a career-high 3 assists this season, so whilst he's not going to get you 20 points a game, your offense doesn't grind to a halt when he's on the floor either. Boston have been mentioned as a possible destination for Pirtle, but frankly, he's a fit with just about every contender. Denver could look to upgrade the Zeke Naji minutes. The Sixers desperately need a backup for Embiid. Considering who could or should be after him, the price for acquiring Pirtle might be higher than you think. Now let's have a look at the Bulls, and a little disclaimer here before we get into it. Chicago's role in proceedings before the trade deadline depends purely on how positively or negatively the front office power brokers view this group. Do they look at the Bulls' record as well as last year's playoff fade-out and decide that their big swing simply hasn't worked? Do they see the team's recent uptick in form and decide to push forward with this group, maybe even add a piece? Let's hope it's the former for Chicago's sake, because let's face it, this team isn't going to compete for honours. Ironically enough, if the Bulls want an example of how you can quickly pivot from a middling, veteran-laden group to a young team on the rise, they could look at the Magic, with whom they started this whole circus when they traded the farm for Nikola Vucevic. Whilst this group doesn't work as a whole, there are individual pieces that could fit seamlessly onto plenty of contending teams. Vooch, DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso especially. Andre Drummond fits well, even Zach LaVine if the team decides to go the nuclear option. Sadly, though, Lonzo Ball and his fossilized knees probably carry little value in the trade market right now. As well as resetting with picks and young players, trading away the veterans also allows the youngsters that are already on the roster, Patrick Williams, Kobe White, Dallin Terry, Ayo Dosunmu, it gives them time to breathe. All these guys need time on the floor, repetitions, in order to grow. They're just not going to get them on a team that is trying unsuccessfully to compete. Blowing it up now also has the added benefit for Chicago of perhaps starting a free fall. If the Bulls pick this year falls inside the top 4, they keep it in one of the most stacked drafts in years. On the previous edition of The Point, I touched upon the plight of the Toronto Raptors, so we won't go over them in greater detail here, other than to say that there is a chance that their famously aggressive general manager, Masai Ujiri, won't be scared to shake things up if he feels it necessary. Both Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby are likely to decline their player options for next season, and it's been reported that VanVleet has already rejected an extension that was either at or close to the max. If he has one foot out the door, don't expect Ujiri to sit on his hands. The Clippers might literally kill a man to get Fred VanVleet on their roster, whilst he'd also prove a wonderful option in Phoenix, both in the present and as a bridge to the rapidly approaching post-Chris Paul era. It's been reported that shooting guard Gary Trent Jr. is also available for trade. I would have expected that this was supposed to clear up cap space to re-sign VanVleet and Anunoby. If VanVleet wants to explore the market for the first time in his career and Trent is still traded, it could mark the start of a teardown. The obvious prizes when talking trades with Toronto are Anunoby and Pascal Siakam. Siakam is the team's best player, clearly, but he's not the cleanest fit on a contender. He's not the best off-ball player, but he isn't good enough to be an out-and-out first option on a proper contending team. That muddies the water for him value-wise somewhat. Anunoby, on the other hand, is a seamless fit. He's the definition of a modern 3-and-D wing. Big, strong, can shoot, put it on the floor, play make a little. If he's moved, look for a haul somewhere in line with what the Spurs garnered for DeJounte Murray. Huge for a man that has never played in an All-Star game. Let's go south to the Charlotte Hornets, where talking about this team makes me a little bit sad, frankly. Are the Hornets sellers? With their eighth seed at all cost philosophy, it's not certain. What is crystal clear, however, is that they should be selling. The Charlotte Hornets have a raft of veterans that would prove handy to a lot of contenders. Mason Plumlee playing career best basketball, Kelly Oubre, Gordon Daywood, Terry Rozier, all of these guys could bring back draft capital and or young players. PJ Washington and Jalen McDaniels are also worth keeping an eye on here. Good players with obvious flaws. Both are set to be free agents at season's end. Both have played well for the Hornets this season, and age-wise fit in with LaMelo Ball's timeline. I'm interested to see if they're dealt before the deadline. If they're not, it signals that the Hornets want to keep them and are perhaps leaning towards these younger players. As well as resetting the roster and loading up with picks, moving Charlotte's veterans would force the coaching staff to give minutes to the likes of Kai Jones and James Bouknight. Both look like colossal draft busts at this point, to be fair. But given the team is going nowhere as it is, it surely can't hurt them to see what they have here. If, as expected, they stink the joint out, it gives the Hornets better lottery odds in a stacked draft. If they turn out to be halfway decent, then the team has a couple of rotation players. It's a win-win. The Utah Jazz now, and it's not just fans and us in the media that have been surprised by the relative on-court success of the Jazz this season. I think that the front office has been taken aback a little too. That said, the Jazz's intention this season and probably the next few is to maximise their draft position. In trying to achieve that aim, expect Danny Ainge to live up to his trader reputation. The obvious trade candidate is veteran lead guard Mike Conley. If the Clippers can't get Van Vliet on board, then Conley would be a fine fallback option. At age 35, he's clearly not the player he was, but he's still an adept table setter and an excellent shooter who could work well off the ball next to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. Malik Beasley is one of the very best movement shooters in the entire NBA. He would be a welcome addition on almost every contender. The Mavericks and Grizzlies would love to get him on board. He's also played as an undersized small forward in the past. Do the Cavs look at him as a possible solution to the massive hole they have at the three? Do the Cavs have anything left to trade to Utah post Donovan Mitchell? The Jazz also have some lesser role players in Kelly Olynyk and Jared Vanderbilt who should interest NBA buyers. Now, before we part, we'll go around the grounds, taking some quick hitters. Bojan Bogdanovic might look like he's in his mid-40s, but he is still a wonderful shooter, a very good secondary playmaker, and a solid defender of bigger wings. Whilst the Pistons have repeatedly said that they're leaning towards keeping him, I think that's just posturing. I think Bojan will be on a contender come February 9th. John Collins has somehow been on the trade rumour mill since about 1985. Perhaps the reason he hasn't been traded, though, is because he's not the easiest fit. He is a very good offensive player at the 4 or 5 positions. I think far better at the 5. Defensively, though, he doesn't exactly hold his end up. He's not quite quick enough on the perimeter to stop most 4s, and he's certainly not the rim protector you need as a 5. As much as he'd like to see the ball more, such are the joys of playing with Trae Young, he's probably in the right situation in Atlanta with Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu there to cover for him defensively. Jay Crowder's people have reportedly been in touch with the Milwaukee Bucks in a move that simply makes too much sense for it not to happen. And lastly, a message for Houston General Manager Raphael Stone. For the love of God, man, please trade Eric Gordon to a contender. The man looks miserable, and he deserves to see out the last of his productive NBA days. Competing for something, actually playing games that matter. And that's not going to happen on a Houston squad for the next few years. So on that slightly desperate and sad note, we'll wrap up this edition of The Point. Please leave your comments and questions below the line, and I promise I'll do my best to respond to you. Don't forget to like and subscribe to The Point and to all of the other wonderful material that Vendetta Sports Media provides. My name is Jarrod Prosser. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you all next time.